Hey friends, thanks for joining me, Jim Baroud, to hear a few insights from leaders who represent our innovation ecosystem. Today's chat is with Scott Huston, CIO of Stockton University, and Victor Gomez, the manager of Esports at Seton University. Victor Gomez, tell us about yourself and your journey into the esports field.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. My name is Victor Gomez. I am the esports manager for Seton University. I'm actually an alumnus of the institution, and I founded this program while I was a student. Went into consulting after graduation and came back around 2018. Around that time, the Big East signed on with EGF for esports, and I said, "Hey, I'm here. Let's get to work." And we've been working hard at that program ever since.
Excellent. Thank you, Victor. Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm Scott Huston. I'm Chief Information Officer at Stockton University, so overseeing IT and everything productions. In an unusual route, esports eventually fell under IT at Stockton, which isn't always traditional, but it's worked out really well. A few years back, our president, Dr. Harvey Kessman, kind of a visionary, he said, "I keep hearing about this esports. We need to be into it." I also had an information security officer who was both a gamer and very much into esports himself. He was telling me how important it was. So we kind of put the two together, said, we need to do this. Started out with a program with just a few students, and just in a couple of years, our last get together had over 500 students involved. So over 70 of them are competing, together and as part of various leagues around the United States. So really kind of took off from there. And then more recently, I've actually been appointed board chair of the newly formed Esports Innovation Center in Atlantic City at Stockton University as well. So it's kind of a different spin on esports, but it's a great field and it just keeps getting better.
Great. And Scott, while I have you, talk about how big Stockton is. Some people aren't familiar. I wasn't familiar with how it's grown. So give us a sort of a context here as far as campuses, population, et cetera.
Yeah, no problem. So we have about 10,000 students now at Stockton University. We're based out of Galloway, New Jersey, so down in the southern part of the state. But we also have Atlantic City, a branch campus there as well. 533 beds overlooking the beautiful ocean. So it's hard to beat. We say there won't be many students that have a nicer first place after that. So we have a great community. I mean, Atlantic City is poised for esports, but then we also have our esports labs on the Galloway campus. We had built one originally. We've already expanded to two, and now have taken over an entire facility for esports. So it keeps growing. Our student base has been absolutely wonderful. The student leadership, and I know Victor, he's speaking as a student who then went and came back. We see that all the time. We just had an event this weekend. We had alumni come back. Esports is just such a great community of students, and they're very passionate about it, that it makes it easy to both run and enjoy at the same time. They're really a great group.
Great. Thanks, Scott, for that clarification. Victor, why don't you tell us about Seton Hall? And then I want you to tell us what an eLab looks like. What is your esports lab? And I'll ask the same thing from Scott about the lab, how we can envision that. Go ahead.
Sure. So Seton Hall has a similar number. We have 10,000 undergraduate and graduate students combined. We're based out of South Orange, New Jersey, and we have several satellite campuses in IHS, which is in Nutley, New Jersey, focuses on medicine, and our law school, which is based out of Newark. In terms of the lab, we have a lab that has been mainly dual purposed between serving an academic crowd, because it's an academic building, as well as our gamers here on campus. So it's 16 top-of-the-line machines from Lenovo, 6 monitors. I believe they're 47, 51 inches with less than 33 millisecond response time, dedicated wiring for each computer, for each of our 16 machines, mechanical keyboards, mice, mouse mats, headsets, all ready to go for our players. And mainly that's to make sure that we take away anything that may cause interference or any sort of lag for them. So our monitors are 240 refresh rate to ensure that they're always getting the most up-to-date information, and therefore can make their best in-game decisions based on that.
So what you're saying is there's no lag. Is that what you're
No,
saying?
not at all. Correct.
No,
Very important.
no,
Very important.
Very, very important.
And let's just dive into that a little bit, because how are you connected to the broadband on campus? Do you have a dedicated access or priorities in any way?
Yeah, so while I was consulting on the creation of the lab, one of the things that I asked for was a dedicated network switch. And the main reason for that is we have a large population on campus, visitors, students, faculty, staff. So all of those things present more bandwidth that's taken up. So by having a dedicated switch, we can now focus just mainly on the students receiving top of line signal.
So a dedicated switch, in layman's term, is sort of a separate tube to the internet node that you have on campus. Is that what you're saying?
Think of
Correct.
a 4-lane highway that we have 1 lane reserved, and you're
For
only
esports.
allowed in it if you're not the HOA vehicle, but if you're an esports vehicle, then you can get in that lane and you can have priority speed traffic.
Got it. All right. So tell us about yours then, Scott.
So when we started out, we built the original lab. It was 18 computers, so very similar. We actually had an idea to get the original group of students that were going to be participating in esports. We purchased all the parts and we actually had them build the machines. And shockingly, to this day, we've had less problems with those machines than any one that we've had come from a manufacturer. But it was a great experience. We had build out books. The students came together with staff of mine. We built all the machines. We put them in the lab. We got, some LED lighting and everything else. And that eventually became what we call the blue room, or the blue lab. And we VCT tile, so, no static going on or anything else in the room. And that's kind of where we started. As the program began to expand, there was another space that we could repurpose within the same facility. So we ended up doing the same there. We actually purchased those machines, did about 24 machines to kind of handle some of the growth that we had going on, painted the room gold, and it became the gold room. And we joke because the blue room, they always have the lights out and just the LED lighting. The gold room, all the lights are on. It's very bright. And now there's even a competition going on between the students that play in the blue room versus the gold room. It's become a big thing. It's how they now identify if you're a gold room player or a blue room player. It's great. It's just we had an exciting event over the weekend, where the players from the various rooms competed to decide which was the greatest. So just another creative way to let our students kind of express themselves. And we're always looking. They've now taken over an entire building on campus, and we're still looking to expand, just because every semester we have more and more students signing up, competing, and getting involved in the many other parts between the broadcasting and the streaming, the networking behind it. It's not just about playing the video games. It's really about the entire ecosphere and all the different opportunities that are in esports.
Great. That's really interesting. And just for context, Scott, how many students are involved in the program?
So right now we always have at least 500 students on our Discord, which is kind of how the students communicate and everything else. So we like to think it's about, 550 students of our population, which out of 10,000 is a really healthy number. We're really excited about that. And actually competing, we have about 75 students who are on one of the teams that are competing week in, week out. But we also do a lot of other events. We just had our Monster Smash event, which is a Halloween themed event that we do, involves cosplay and playing retro video games, everything else. And we're excited that we have nearly 50% representation at that event between male and female students, which we really think is important for esports in general. So we celebrated that. It was great. It was a great group of students got together, had this event. It was really successful, and the student body just keeps embracing esports.
That's great. And how about you, Victor? What's your demographics look like?
Sure. So in terms of players, we have 18 players across 3 titles currently, with 3 player managers just to help them manage their scrims and practices. In terms of our Discord, we have 2. We have one dedicated specifically to esports and one dedicated to gaming. And that comes from just experience as a student running both. there are some students who prefer a casual time, and that's what we would like to cater to. And then students who prefer a more competitive time, that was what the esports Discord is for. So we have about 550 on our gaming sector Discord, which is the gaming club, and about 156 on our esports Discord. So it's a pretty healthy population, and I'm very glad to keep it growing. Overall, I think that the players really like to be able to show off what they do here at Seton Hall. I know our Rocket League players are really big on communicating with both fans and other students. They recently got top 5 in the East, and that was a huge pleasure for us. We actually got to compete against Stockton and Scott's team, a great group of players. So it's one of those things where it's a point of pride for our campus and it's a point of pride for our players.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. So give us sort of a sense for how big is this community nationwide. We have 2 obviously great schools with great teams doing really well. How does that? I mean, how many schools have programs across the country? Are you 2 schools that are leading the pack? I mean, give us some context here. Scott, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I think, when we kicked off in 2019, I'd like to say we were blazing the path. It was new. We were still trying to figure it out. And I know this mainly because we had a multitude of other universities come visit our facility to kind of get an idea of, how to do this, how to do it right. Usually the biggest conversation is, does this fall under athletics or does this fall under student development? And we said, joke's on you. We tried both and we ended up under IT. But it really ends up where the passion is behind it, and where it fits well. I think there's also, I think every university and college across, the nation is starting to look at this. And if they don't have a team already, they want to have something set up, or at least a casual setup. But it's also a little bit still of the wild, wild west out there. The athletics, traditional NCAA, they have, kind of put a pause on embracing esports, or at least trying to take it over, which leaves some interpretation. I mean, there's not many organizations where on the national scale we could play Ohio State next weekend, where there's no other sport that a D3 school from South Jersey is going to compete against, a D1 powerhouse. So it's still a bit unregulated, but in a way, because of that, it's grown organically. And in many ways, it's done it right. Nobody pushed the rules or anything else. There's also many different leagues forming. So you can kind of find the one that fits your purpose the best, whether it's completely remote gameplay or if there's personal, in-person gameplay as well. I will say it's expanding and it's only going to get larger. All the statistics we see from the younger generation, the high schools, they're all trying to do it as well. A week doesn't go by that we're not hosting a high school here on campus to show them our lab, or to, try to get them involved in esports. Their students want to do it as well. One of the, only silver linings I would say of the pandemic is a lot of students were home and looking for an activity to be able to do from their home. So those that weren't gamers became gamers, and, it's been great. So it just continues to grow. And I think we're going to see, the need to have esports at the university level pretty much across the board, just with what we currently see and then what's coming up. It's definitely not going away. And I would say at this point, if you're not already vested in it, you're getting late in the game.
Got it. How about you, Victor? How do you see it?
Sure. So again, I'm looking at it from growing alongside esports. So in 2014, we had our first Big 10, I would say, programs leading the charge. Stabilizing in 2015 with Robert Morris University. That quickly expanded to 100, then 200. Then by 2018, we had, I want to say, 500 organizations across the nation, either at a varsity level or at a club competing level. So it's definitely growing, just like Scott said. It's something that isn't stopping and isn't going anywhere. If we take a look at the younger generation, for example, there was an article on, I believe it was Forbes, May 2020, part of the pandemic. 1 in every 2 children in America are playing Roblox, right? So if we see that, then we can safely assume that those children will grow to play more games and then become more vested in esports. In a similar fashion to Scott, there isn't a week that comes by that I don't get an email, a call, a Discord message on, hey, Can I check out your lab? Am I able to play with one of your team members? Can I learn more about what esports is? Recently, more so from high schools trying to embrace the industry.
Right. That's really fascinating. So, so you're saying it's widespread across the country. Most universities, no, not most. Maybe half the universities have teams. Is that what the guesstimate would be?
I'm going to push that above 50% at this point.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
I would agree.
Yeah. I think the big difference there, and we saw it as well. Luckily, as I stated before, our president was on board from day one, which really gave us, it was an official Stockton sanctioned program. A lot of other schools that started as an unaffiliated or as a student club type program. And some remain that way, but most have now converted to having university support as well. But, if you take it agnostic as a whole, I would say well over 50% of schools probably have some type of esports operation running on campus, whether they're promoting it or not.
Wow. And so when you compete with another school, explain to folks, is that in person or is that just totally remote online?
So
Victor, go
I
ahead.
would, yeah, I would say it really does depend. We can do both. That is the beauty of esports. Just like any other competition, it's better in person just because you can have the fans right there cheering you on. The students always get very excited to be able to play in person. It's a whole different type of vibe. But we can play completely remote. In the competition that I was telling you about earlier before we got this conversation started, we played Stockton remotely, right? But we played DePaul, for example, in the Big East first in-person event in New York City. It was a location called OSNYC. They opened their doors. We came in. There was a massive screen, about 300 people there, just cheering on their schools from all over the Big East. So it is growing. And in terms of how it can be played at the professional level, you'll see this more. It's more guided to in person because the energy is just different from being able to see it at your home while laying on your bed, for example.
Yeah, I say all the time that the greatest part about esports is an away game is also a home game. So, no matter who you're playing, you can do it from your own facility. So we're following a similar model. A lot of the regular season games we're playing remotely, and then they're having a capstone event or a championship event. And many times then we travel to actually compete in person. And I think there's importance to both of them. I think number one is with the rise of Twitch, YouTube, and other services, there's always the ability to watch. All of our games are being simulcasted, streamed out to the internet, 50,000 people watching them from all over the country. I mean, great from a marketing perspective, great from an outreach perspective. I don't even know if we have a facility on campus that we could bring in 50,000 people to watch this type of an event. So it has its element doing it that way, but there is something electric about having it in person. And just a quick tangent story to that is one of our earlier teams, we competed at Boardwalk Hall for an event, and it was an in-person event. We played some other teams. And it was the first time that some of the students' parents had come to actually watch them. And watching the joy of that parent see their student who maybe was never on an organized soccer team, growing up, or, never won the baseball, World Series or anything like that, watching them compete in an esports event with all the excitement and everything else. And, we were fortunate enough to win that. So, confetti's going off and everything else at the end of it. And just seeing that, they finally understood what their student had been spending hours and hours a day practicing, playing, working with their teammates, finally came together in a real tangible, you could touch it event, and they got to watch them win. It was a special moment, and it really kind of solidified the importance of that in-game, in-person presence as well.
That's a great anecdote. Now, what about and it seems like this really is a valuable marketing tool for universities, right? Unlike any other, right? Unless it's a top basketball player, right? You could have really well-connected esports players who are probably even more connected, through the community, through social media, through Twitch, whatever, Discord with potential students. Are you seeing that? Is that the right assumption I'm making?
Yeah,
I would-
100%.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly.
Yep. We run a couple local events where we invite the local high schools to kind of compete against each other. And the reward for doing that is if you're the winning team, you can then go against one of our JV or varsity teams and, also receive some coaching from those teams as well. And to see the students really embrace that. Just this week, we had a student on campus visiting, both the university as a prospect, but was actually a student who had competed in one of those high school tournaments. And our players recognized them right away, started that conversation, because they had already had that in-person conversation. And because esports is built on technology and communication, it's not, unknown for them to have already talked through a Discord or through some kind of a chat, maybe have already played a game together. That's something you don't see on the basketball court or, out on track and field that esports can lend itself to. And it really creates those bonds and those in-person relationships. And I have endless stories about students who have come into our esports program who, you could barely get a word or two out of. They just wanted to sit at the computer. If they weren't in our lab, they were back at their dorm or, playing 16 hours a day. And then through the process of becoming teammates and competing, now they're going to the gym together. They're eating lunches together. They just hosted a dodgeball tournament together. I mean, talk about seeing esports players go out there and throw balls at each other on a gym court. It's just something you would never think would happen, but they've built a support system and they have these lifelong friends now. So for all the students, and the parents out there who, have a student who just goes into the bedroom, starts grinding at the keyboard and you never see him again, it really gives them the ability to make these lifelong friendships, have somebody to talk to, have a support system. And that's what we always say is, our goal with the labs is just to have computers that are as good, if not better, than what they have at home, because we would rather have them playing in a safe, controlled environment. We can monitor how much they're playing, how they're interacting, just for the well-being of the student. It's perfect, but it's unbelievable to see the transformation of some of our esports students from when they come in to when they leave. They go from, introverts to doing, radio interviews, TV interviews. It's unbelievable.
That's really great to hear, especially when we think of gamers, we kind of think of that person in the bedroom, cocooned and very introverted. And so it's really good to hear those types of stories. Victor, have you seen the same thing?
Oh, 100%. I think it was very eye-opening for a lot of administrators for our in-person tournament. For example, our players went into a hotel, and so our admins woke up, just as a small tangent, and they woke up around 7. And they're like, oh, well, we're going to have to wake up the esports players because they're probably asleep because they were playing games all night. My players were all in the gym at 6. So they woke up before the admins, woke each other up, roused each other up, got into the gym because they said, we need to make sure to get in our workout before we even can play, right? So I think it's a world of a difference from the more common misnomer that, oh, gamers are just locked up in a basement, for example, eating Doritos and drinking Mountain Dew, right? The definition of gamer has really evolved, especially in this day and age. So I think it's one of our points of pride to say, hey, yes, we do have students who have grown, but also the students that are coming in are from all wonderful walks of life. And it's really eye-opening to a lot of people to see that, especially when we put up our rosters. They're like, oh my God, I never would have expected an esports player to look like that. So it's a good time.
Yep.
That is really interesting. I wouldn't think about that, them going to the gym, but the reality is they can come in all shapes and sizes, even with disabilities, right? Frankly, is that an accurate sort of picture?
Yeah,
100%.
Some of the best streamers on Twitch are actually people who are differently abled. I mean, gaming is so beautiful because of its accessibility. So we have people who can't play with legs or hands, and one of the most successful COD streamers is playing with a tube that reads how he blows into it, to then move his character, right? Microsoft has made a lot of strides with their Pro controller to make it more possible for differently abled people to be able to play the games that everyone else can. So it's a great
It's
medium.
also it's students from a wide array of backgrounds, talents, majors. Everybody presumes it's the computer science program that's also the esports program, and that couldn't be further off. When we run the majors report, we have, biochem majors, we have future educators, all the different majors have students involved in the esports program. The last time we ran the GPAs, they were all above 3.0 as an aggregate. It's a great group of diverse students, and it's not the traditional student that was on the robotics team in high school, or Cisco CCNA. It's a great group of diverse students, and that allows them to learn from each other as well in the process.
Yeah, no, that's really great to hear. So you spoke about high schools, right? So now, as a parent, right, my kids are into Roblox, or they're not in high school yet, but should, once, if they're really into gaming, right, parents might have children that come to them and say, I want to be a gamer. I'm going to spend, instead of being on the soccer field 5 days a week or 7 days a week for a few hours, I'm gaming, and I'm going to try to get a scholarship to a university. Now, what are your thoughts on that? Because I'm sure that's happening probably a million times a year.
Scott, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So we talk to a lot of parents, and listen, I have a 16-year-old at home as well. And it was always you're just wasting your time in there gaming, and you're never going to have anything, until he came with the top 10 earners in esports, and esports personalities. And we said, oh, they're kind of making as much as MLB players these days. So it's kind of an argument that had to get thrown out the window. I think a healthy balance is needed. Number one, they're learning abilities between problem solving, teamwork, dexterity, mental capacity. There's a lot that goes into esports, more than clicking around on a controller. The students are learning technology. I can tell you, most of them never knew what ping was before they became into esports, and now all of a sudden they want the fastest internet connection at home and need a latency under 10 milliseconds. From somebody built in technology, I was excited about just the fact that they were now speaking my language. They wanted a gigabit switch. It got me excited. So there's a lot to learn in the process as well. They're also streaming out. They're using Photoshop to make backgrounds. There's a lot of education that's happening that is similar to being the captain of a soccer team, but even more in some ways, that they're learning real life applications that maybe aren't in those traditional sports. I think it's important that they still get out and socialize and run around on a field and stay, that's important as well. But I think, and we talk about this all the time, and for any school board members out there, and I'm sure Victor's going to agree with this, the schools come to us, the high schools, they want to do this, but they're trying to get the support of the school boards and of the administrators. Get on board. It's what the students are doing. So give them a healthy atmosphere to do it, and promote it, and make them feel like this is a great thing for them. And it can really be something beautiful in the end. I think, it's time to learn about what esports really are and all the benefits to esports, and then just guide the student in that direction.
Victor?
Yeah, I tend to agree. It is one of those things where if the students are already doing it, it's better to nourish that and nurture it to get them to be the best that they can possibly be. In regards to students asking, oh, I want to be a gamer, as Scott said, it's all about balance, right? If we're looking at the pro level, you have students, or rather players, who come in and they'll practice 16 hours a day. But two parts of that practice are nutrition. It's working out at the gym. It's part of the contract that they sign on most any professional org. They have to do their workouts. Then it's VOD review. And then a subset of that is actually playing. But a lot of the practice that goes into professional gaming comes from what you do outside. It's the same thing as in any traditional sport. where yes, what you put in on the court, on the pitch, etc., matters, but it's the conditioning that you do before you even get on that matters more. So you'll see a lot of players go on to something called aim labs if they play first person shooters, and they'll spend 30 minutes of just warming up, clicking on things that appear and disappear in order to train their aim so that when they go into the game, then they can actually practice. So it's one of those things where if you can nurture it correctly, like anything, it can become a great boon and asset. And it's definitely something that a student can thrive in. Just remind the student that they're students first, right? It's one of the things that I preach to all my students, whether it be student workers or student athletes. The student part is paramount because that's what they're here for. And anything that we build onto that is to enhance their experience of being a student.
Got it. Let me just double click on that. If they go to the gym, are they doing other exercises? Anything? I like that example you gave about that AIM software. That's really interesting. Are there any other exercises outside the normal aerobic and weights that they might do in the gym to make them better prepared for gaming?
Yeah, mostly cardio is something that helps a lot, and strength training. Outside of the gym, it really comes down to knowing how to stretch properly. With gaming and intense games, things are decided on milliseconds, right? Which means that you're moving your muscles consistently and repeatedly. So repetitive stress syndrome becomes an issue. Carpal tunnel becomes an issue, right? And these used to be things that ended professional gamers' careers 5 years ago, right? Today, because of how much we've learned from so many people playing, we know that stretching is important, taking breaks is important, hydration is important. So all those things build into these programs that our players can do before they get on, right? Stretching your wrists, making sure to get up between matches, and making sure that your posture is good. All those things build up on the basis of you're working out outside, you're going to the gym, so that you're prepared for when you have to sit down and do a 6-hour tournament, for example, right? That takes a stress on the body like any 6-hour tournament would. So it's better to have them prepared for that rather than going in blind and then opening themselves up to injury.
Right. Thanks for clarifying that, Victor. Now, what about academic related programs? Talk to us about what that is and where you folks are at with your own institutions. Scott?
Yeah, sure. So we're in the building phase right now. We are, I like to say, building the scaffolding to do it correctly. We're looking at the opportunities out there. We're looking at what our current course content that may lend to esports. And then we're also just gathering data about career placement and everything else that happens through esports. Esports is so much more than just, being at the keyboard, being at the controller. There's on-air personalities, there's the entire technology infrastructure behind it. Social media is huge in esports. I mean, the main conduit to marketing and everything else with esports is through the social media. It's getting the gameplay out there. It's getting the personalities out there. So we're looking at traditional majors we have in communications and business and marketing, and seeing where they can lend, and then building up a core structure of esports related classes to kind of solidify what might be both a certificate program, a major, and a minor. And then also looking at things like our MBA program, which is wildly successful, and how the next step may be an MBA in esports, and the management behind it. When you watch one of these events come together and you're on a team meeting ahead of time, you are talking with an individual from almost every different aspect of a business or corporation in trying to get one of these events to run. So what we also preach to our students who both play and then the ones who are asking for the academic side is, what career is this going to lead you into, and what skills can you get? What do you need to know? So, I think in the near future, we will have an academic program out there. We just wanted to make sure that we did it right. There were a lot that popped up very early on and, marketed themselves as esports programs, but they only really had like an esports capstone course. We really wanted to build it from the ground up, make sure that from day one it's esports, related. And I think we're very close to having that offering.
Right. Victor?
Yeah, I we're basically at the same wavelength here. We're in the ideation phase, trying to see what we can do to best serve our students. As Scott mentioned, esports is an industry, right? Not just a subset of people who play games. In the same way that if you work in the NBA, you could be anything from an accountant to a physical therapist, right? So with that in mind, that's what we want to build towards. But equally, it's important for us to show that teaching goes on outside of the classroom, right? Experiential learning is really big for us, specifically for our players. So whether it be how to properly set up scrims, right? Or knowing how to run a practice. These are things that then translate into knowing how to run a meeting, right? Having an agenda for a meeting, how to run an event. So while we're not offering anything per se at the academic level just yet, I think we are teaching a lot of our students very valuable lessons in just how to get there by means of experiential learning.
Got it. Before we get to questions, share with us just one thing we should all know about the future of esports.
The future of esports is huge. It's going to continue to grow. It's not going to stop. Everyone who said that, it was going to kind of time out, it hasn't. So I would just say, if you're in any type of organization that has an involvement or could, I would get on board now, because it's going to continue to grow in the years to come.
Victor?
For me, it would be that esports is equivalent to community. And if you're trying to build a community or trying to enhance yours, esports is a beautiful way to do so. From the professional level to the collegiate level, they all started with grassroots efforts. And so we can capitalize on that to do many great things.
Great, thanks. Now, we're going to get to talent pipeline, the state of women and girls in esports. First of all, are they involved, and are they being encouraged, or give us sort of the state of play?
Yeah, I think, I mentioned it earlier that we have a large community of esports individuals. And at our last event, it was about 50-50 for male and female participation, which we were extremely excited about. I would say early on in esports, there was a stigma around it being male dominated. And I think in certain aspects, maybe it still is, but I think it's something that is making huge strides, especially as esports becomes less about just playing the games and more about the entire, ecosphere around it and all the tangential areas that come into it. I think it continues to grow, and women are finding more and more roles in that. As I meet with, the corporations and everybody else that's involved, many females are involved in that. And then as far as our student leadership, Victor mentioned earlier, each of our teams has, a leader of the team to kind of organize and make sure. Many of those, for at least at Stockton, are females who are hosting those positions. So most of our leadership team is actually comprised of female leaders. So we're happy, very happy with the strides that we have made to make sure that, our female student population is involved with the esports program. I think that's something we're going to concentrate moving forward. So I think it's great. And there was even a time we were approached by a league, which was going to be a female only league. And they asked if some of our female players wanted to play in it. And, we kind of stepped back and said, this is for, our student leaders and our students to decide. And they actually decided they weren't interested, for the main feature that they didn't feel like they needed a female league. They were competing with the male players just as well as anybody else. They were winning our top varsity spots on our teams. And they said, I don't need a female league. There's nothing holding me back from being the best player at Stockton, as a female. So I thought that was really, interesting that they took that perspective. And I look forward, obviously, as our female players just continue to grow. I think on the younger end, it's becoming much more socially acceptable for, females to be involved in technology and to be gamers as well. So I think that's something we're going to continue to see improve as time goes on.
Great to hear. Victor, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, personally, in the West, I think we're doing a lot of catch up in inclusion of women and female identifying persons. And that's mainly just because of our marketing tactics, right? A good example of this was Call of Duty, right? There was a huge marketing tactic, which was just memes of, oh, I'm here to sue your boyfriend, right? But we know, based on the data and player data, that women were playing COD too, right? So a lot of the tactics to secure players weren't geared towards women at all. In the mobile sphere, in competitive games like Arena of Valor, for example, there's a 60% female population worldwide, right? Which is something that we would only dream of in League of Legends in North America, for example, right? So we're trending towards that by means of just openly being more inviting, right? And if you're looking at it from a high school perspective, or if you're starting a program, don't just go, hey, these students are, whoever those students may be, are just sitting back and not participating. Actively reach out, ask why you're not participating, come get involved, play a game with us, right? I think there's a lot of people or underserved communities within esports, and female identifying persons are some of them, mainly because there isn't an enthusiastic reach out, right? To say, hey, come play, right? Or hey, get involved. But in a similar vein to Scott, we've seen that trend upwards, right? For us, we're a very nascent program at a varsity level, only 2 years old. We have our first female player this year on our League of Legends roster, but the president of our program was a female. She just graduated, so we're switching leadership roles now. So it's very exciting to see just everyone get involved and have a voice and a presence here on our campus.
Let me just clarify something, Victor. You said in the West, there historically haven't been as many women or females involved in
Correct.
gaming. Are you saying and this is really interesting, in the East, there's been, or in other parts of the world, there's been a higher proportion of female activity in esports?
Yes, and that's mainly because the West has focused on PC gaming and not so much mobile gaming, which is a lot more accessible to a lot more people. So we see games like Arena of Valor, for example. Their main populace is India, China, and Asia, right? Where phones are plentiful, right? So if you can make a game that a lot of people can access, and it's open and no one's has any preconceived notions, it becomes a lot easier to have a higher ratio of different identifying persons in the game.
Wow, that's really interesting. And what about diversity in at least America? Is it are all populations or demographics represented? How do you see that now, and is it evolving?
I would say it's evolving. There's a socioeconomic aspect to esports, specifically PC esports, because the great example is the Xbox Series S, right? For $300 and $15 a month, you get access to a bunch of games through a console, right? And you probably already have a TV, so it's not that much of an investment to get in. You always have a second controller, so you can play with multiple people. Pre-pandemic and pre-silicon shortage, if you wanted to build your own computer, it used to be cheap by computer terms at $1,000, $700, right? But that's just for the tower. That's not the monitor, that's not the keyboard, that's not the mice, the internet, accessories, headsets, games. And then you could see that run up to $1,500, $2,000. So from the start, it's a gateway to entry. One of the reasons why we opened up our lab here was to take away one of those barriers to entry, right? To have a place where students can come in and experience what a high level computer feels like, and then actually get to play on those machines, right? In terms of the professional level, I see a lot more evolving. So the Esports Awards were just held last week. Ifia Shaks Deportere won the Esports Personality of the Year, if I'm correct. She was amongst 3 other women on analytics and reporting and broadcasting for esports, right? We're seeing the president of TSM, Team Solomid, one of the largest and oldest esports organizations in North America. Their president is Lena Zhu, who's also female, right? So we're trending and evolving towards more inclusion and diversity in the North American climate.
Wow, that's fascinating. Now, what about Well, first of all, what are the games? I mean, you mentioned, Call of Duty. You mentioned Rocket League. Explain what are the top 5 games, and maybe what are the future games that we should know about?
Scott?
Yeah, sure. So our main competitions, Fortnite obviously it was an easy one when we started out, just because it was a household name. League of Legends is traditionally a very popular title. Call of Duty that we've mentioned a few times, COD. Overwatch gets a lot of play here at Stockton as well. And then Rocket League, obviously, we've had some really successful teams, which is basically soccer with cars, but really popular to watch. And then Valorant, Hearthstone, there's some others that have kind of popped up since then. And then you have the traditional sports titles as well. So your Maddens, your FIFAs that are coming up, which are usually, sometimes a different student and a different, personality than our traditional games, but are also great, and have really continued to diversify. A lot of those are played on consoles as well. So what Victor was talking about, they may have been playing on that console for a very long time. You don't need, the greatest computer that you're constantly updating a graphics card in to play. So we've adopted those as well, 2K, just to expand on our offering. And we really leave it up to our students. We originally had done a student survey about what they want to play. We started with 3 or 4 titles to get started. And then as they've shown popularity in other titles and leagues have adopted them as well, we've, adopted those as part of our program. And another testament just to our student leadership of really having a pulse on both the community and then where esports is going, to derive the list of games that we actively compete in. It will continue to evolve as well. Valorant, nobody had heard of years ago, and now it's a very popular title for us. So I think this will continue to evolve. And as we have more students come in to Stockton, the gaming titles will change. But it's just been great that, we can have students in many different avenues, all be able to compete for Stockton.
That's great. That's great. Now, what about, let's peek into the future as we wind down here. VR, AR, Oculus, is that the next big thing related to esports as you folks see it?
So from my perspective, I think mobile will be the one that takes the next big step forward in esports before AR and VR. And that's mainly just accessibility, right? With AR and VR, and even with the Quest, although it allows you to scan the room and play from there, it's going to take a bit for people to just have clear space where they can actively play, right? And move their bodies around without knocking over that very expensive lamp or their computer tower that's made of glass, right? So it's one of those things where I think mobile is the next big thing in esports. We're seeing it with competitions already valued at $2 million prize pools, which is where our nascent professional league started all those years ago.
But when you say mobile, what does that mean? Does that mean a mobile phone or something else?
Mobile phone, right? Phones are getting more powerful by the day. And even Apple, who is traditionally known for not being good at games, right? Their Apple M1 chips and system on a chip has made great strides to allowing great graphics and more fluid gameplay. We see connectivity rising, right? With 5G means that you'll be able to play with less lag. So companies like Riot Games are investing into this through the Wild Rift, which is their version of League of Legends on phone.
Wow.
Yeah, and it increases both accessibility, from their standpoint. It makes it easier to play. You're sitting in a doctor's office, you pull out that phone, you're good to go. You're not going to bring your computer with you everywhere you go. And I think on the VR front and everything else, I think what esports will bring is an exposure to it, because I honestly think it's going to be the careers of tomorrow that are going to adopt VR that will drive the market towards that. We've already seen it. I think you're going to see it more in medical. In military aspects, we've seen it, where VR is becoming, a big play there. And I think it will drive students who are interested in the esports community towards those positions. But I tend to agree with Victor. I don't see it on the immediate horizon as being, a big impact on the esports competitive market.
God, let me just clarify. Are you saying people can practice on their phones, right? But are they actually? You're not saying they're actually competing on their phones, are they? That seems very uncomfortable.
Oh no, they are.
They are.
So at the professional level, they already are. I know one of the funniest things, Razer came out with finger sleeves, right? Which seems very silly to people who are looking at it from an esports perspective, but gaming mice seemed silly 10 years ago, right? Why would you need a mouse that's pulling rate is 600 back in the early days, right? Now they have polling rates of up to 3,000 just because they want every second to count. There's adapters for phones where you can have triggers installed, and those have been third party since I want to say about 2009, when PUBG Mobile became a thing. So it's one of those things where it is very early days for esports on phones, but its time is coming and it's growing everywhere. Microsoft is following that growth. They have India set as their next target market for 2022 and beyond. And that's mainly through a mobile lens because of the accessibility of phones. So
Wow,
it's very exciting.
that is fascinating. All right, we're going to close this out, folks. This has been really, really interesting. We're going to have to have you guys back. So leave us with a saying or poem. Rick, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I'll share one from Pablo Neruda. I'll translate it so it's in English. A child who does not play is not a child, but the man who does not play has lost forever the child in him, and he will certainly miss him. And that's from his memoirs.
Thank you. Scott, go ahead.
Well, this is a long time Stockton philosophy, and I'm a Stockton grad myself 2 times over and have never left since then, coming on 17 years. And funny enough, I heard Victor kind of mentioned it earlier, and it was like, wow, that's awesome. Is students first. When making any decision about esports, about the university, about what's next, it's students first. Put the student in the perspective and make decisions based on that, and you will never go wrong.
Nice. That's a great way to leave this. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Victor. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please like it, leave a review, and subscribe. See you soon.